Welcome, all you Shehanites, to another special episode of Sheehan is Dead Comics. I will be flying solo and interviewing Tim Sheridan. Tim Sheridan, if you don't know, wrote The Long Halloween, the adaptation, which is absolutely fantastic. I must say, I won't compare the book with the movie because they're both wonderful in their own right, sincerely. So Tim Sheridan is coming on the show, and here he is.
Let me see if these work. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I apologize for on Scott's behalf, but he got like the day after Comic-Con when we saw you, he got the Comic crud. He got the Comic-Con crud. So he had COVID, and then that turned into bronchitis. He's been sick for 2 weeks. So,
oh no!
But he gave me some questions. He gave me a good wrapper of questions that he wanted to ask in person. So,
oh, good, very good.
So, well, I must tell you, forgive me for this, but up until I saw your name for the writing The Long Halloween, I wasn't sure where you came from. Where were you writing comics before that, or
No, I came to comics after that. Well, it's funny, like I came to comics after I wrote The Long Halloween, but it was released right when my first comic book, Titans Academy, was coming out.
That's it. Yeah, so, Titans Academy. Okay.
Yeah, but I had been done with my work on Long Halloween at that point, for years. In fact, The Long Halloween was supposed to come out in 2020, but there was it got delayed in production because Matt Reeves's The Batman movie. There was a moment when DC thought that his movie was going to be very directly based on The Long Halloween.
Okay.
And, although we were already in production, they wanted us to slow our roll so that just in case, like, we weren't allowed to release that movie, I think. This is my understanding, until his movie came out. But then somewhere in the middle of the process, they determined that it was different enough, and it wasn't going to be called The Long Halloween. So they told us to go ahead. So by that point, we had moved the third movie, which was Man of Tomorrow, up in the production order and put that out first. So anyway, that's a really boring story, but it is to say that my work on those things were done. And then I was working on other stuff. I worked on other animated shows and other things. I did some shows at Netflix, and then I got a call I got hooked up through Warner Brothers Animation. Dan DiDio, who was editor-in-chief at the time at DC Comics, was looking to bring in a whole group of new writers, and preferably people who had TV experience and DC experience. So there was a great sort of well of animation writers available for him, and it was for his 5G initiative, which I don't know if you've heard about, but that was what we all got brought into.
You go. Just tell your story.
Yeah, it's fine. 5G was a thing that Dan DiDio had been pitching and was going to do. It happened, I think, after the AT&T purchase of Warner Brothers, and so there was a little inside joke with the 5G name. But yeah, his plan was to have TV writers who were accustomed to working. The way we work in TV most of the time is we work in a writer's room. So we're a bunch of writers working in a room together, sharing ideas, working out story together, working out dialogue together, doing all sorts of stuff together, and then sort of going off on our own and writing individual scripts, and then everybody kind of having a hand in working on them and rewriting them. And it was, I think a dream of his to have a bullpen of writers that were accustomed to sort of sharing all that responsibility, and who were able to work together without any without like normal frictions or things like that. People who were accustomed to sort of getting past any weird friction or anything like that in the room. I think it was a really smart idea. I think it's a really good idea for how to approach like a whole new years worth of stories in a great mythology with 40 some books or something like that. Everybody kind of working on what the big story is together, and then going off and writing our own books, but talking to each other all the time and being able to sort of feed into each other's stories and what have you. And not have any egos getting in the way, and be able to all be servicing the greater story. That I think it was an admirable thing to try and do. I don't know that I have no idea if 5G would have been something people would have really loved, but there were some big swings that were going to be taken. And I was going to do 2 books for that. There was a Nightwing Oracle book, which would have had Dick and Barbara sort of in their 40s, because everybody was going to kind of get aged up to like in relationship to each other in a way that made sense.
Mhm.
And so I think Batman would have been in his 60s, and Dick Grayson would have been in his 40s. And so I had an idea for a story with that was very heartfelt. And I was coming up on the same age that they were going to be in the book, so I had a lot to say about sort of what it was to be to this place in your life where they were. And I was also going to do the Flash for 5G, which would have been a new character. And that was I had a whole story with that pre-COVID, by the way. I had a story about a telepathic virus that was spreading really fast around the world, and the only person who could keep up with it to sort of contain it and stop its spread was this new Flash character. And it was called Wildfire, was the idea for the story. And
Quite
it
on
was
the
based
nose, eh? Yeah.
well, it was based, yeah, I know, right? But it was based on the idea there were all these wildfires happening in Australia, and he was Australian, this character. And so it was that was what inspired the idea. And but it all went away. Unfortunately, Dan was let go, and Bob Harris and everybody who was sort of carrying the flame for that stuff. And I thought that was I thought that was it. I was like, oh, I guess I won't do comics. I guess that was my chance. So I'm going to keep doing stuff in animation and TV and movies and stuff. And then I had this idea to do I pitched one of the editors that I was going to work with on 5G. I pitched him an idea for a tie-in book, just like a little mini series or even a one-shot that would tie into Superman, Man of Tomorrow, this movie that I had that came out in 2020.
I have that movie.
Yeah. And thank you.
Yeah.
And so I was like, the guy who directed the movie really wants to do comics. He's a great artist. We've got a story that will tie into the movie. The movie's going to be selling big at Walmart. So, I know they had a deal at the time to put comics on end cap and an end cap at Walmart, and they were looking for stuff to fill those end caps with. I was like, this is a match made in heaven. Let's do it. And they said, no. And what I didn't know at the time was I was pitching them a Superman Man of Tomorrow book. And like 2 weeks after I pitched this, Rob Venditti's Man of Tomorrow digital first book came out. And so they were already deep into working on something with that title. And so it didn't make sense to put out a Man of Tomorrow book that tied into the movie. So, but to their out of their great wisdom, they still ended up pitching me a book and hiring me to write a couple of books. They brought me in to do Titans Academy and Shazam, and then Shazam was going to be ongoing, and then they ended up making it a miniseries, and so we spun it into as part of the Titans Academy story, which came out of Future State. Future State was a whole thing that had a lot of the remnants of the 5G stories, and so I just kind of focused on telling my story, and I did 4 Future State issues with Teen Titans and Shazam. I did 15 issues of Academy and 4 issues of Shazam, and that's all one big story. And it's kind of told in a weird sequence. So I'm desperately hoping someday they'll put out like an omnibus of all of those in the reading order, you know. So people ask me all the time, they're like, I don't know where to start reading this, you know. But you know, that was my way in. That's where I came from.
That's a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing. I must toot my our horn just a little bit. Dan DiDio, friend of the show,
Oh
had
my gosh, I that's wonderful.
yeah, we had Dan on a few months ago. He was a lot of fun, and the
Did he
guys in
talk
my
about 5G?
very little because that
Oh
wasn't
man,
really
now I'm going to get in trouble then. If he didn't talk about it, I shouldn't be
well,
talking about it.
I'll tell you someone who did. Another friend of the show, Philip Kennedy Johnson, he mentioned 5G and he was like, okay, but really, when are we going back to normal? And they're like, no, this is it. And he goes, no. And they're like, no, really. And he's like, okay, you
It
know?
was going to be a big reset. Yeah.
Yeah,
But a reset that at least it had on paper, it made some sense. You know, that
yeah.
there's some things that didn't make sense in terms of everybody's ages and stuff, you know.
I
And so
personally, I personally was not a fan of it, but I do appreciate I feel like in anything you can find a good story, and story will always grab the attention of readers, especially myself. Like there's
mhm.
things where I'm like, this is a silly idea, and then I read it. Like New 52, some of the things outside of Batman to me were like, I was like, oh boy. But then I started reading them and I was like, wow, this is good. I enjoy it. It's a good story.
Yeah, you know, look, I love big swings.
Yeah.
I love a
And so
really
does
big
Dan.
swing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so does Dan,
Yeah.
you know, I think it would have been something, and I think he had a heck of a bullpen of writers that were coming in. I mean, they look, that room was had people that are now like Jeremy Adams and I came in
Yes.
at the same time. We both came in on that 5G thing.
So he was a
Um,
television guy, Jeremy?
yeah, Jeremy and I both we grew up together in animation. Yeah,
Okay.
we were friends long before comics. And in fact, you know, I got in the door first with Academy and Shazam, and Jeremy came in a little bit later to do Flash. So I was kind of like I'd been there a couple months, so I sort of was able to show him the ropes a little bit and tell him all the stuff that I had gone through, like the adaptation of learning how to work within the editorial structure of DC Academy, DC Comics, which was a totally different, you know, on Academy, which was a totally different thing than working in TV for us, you know.
Right. So thank you for going there. That bridges my next question. So how different is it when you come in, you know, you're writing television, you wrote the Long Halloween, and then you come in to write a comic. How different is that?
Oh,
You have to unscramble
at
your
the
brain.
time, I thought this is going to be a piece of cake because story is story and comics are, you know, another visual medium, and they're a lot like storyboards, not quite, but they are a lot like storyboards. I mean, I don't do storyboards, but I've been working around them for a long time. So you know, it seemed like it was going to be easy, and then it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I immediately realized I had no idea what I was doing. And this was early. This was well before, this is many months before any of my books showed up on shelves. And I said, first of all, like I had read um Denny O'Neil's book. That's about all I knew about like how to write a comic book script. I talked to my friend Alan Burnett.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. So you mean the book that like is on that is like selling on Amazon? The one Denny O'Neil?
Yeah, yeah. How to write, I don't remember what the title is. It's,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
no, no, but I get the
writing
gist because
comics.
I've run across it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, that's I you know, I'd read that, but you know, you know, poured over the pages. And because, you know, to me Denny O'Neil was comics. Like that's when I came into comics. Denny O'Neil was, you know, his name was on everything. I didn't understand when I was a kid what that meant. Like I didn't understand what it meant that he was the editor. I mean, I understood the writer, but but what I knew was, and you know, he would answer the letters in the back of the you know, in the back of the comics, you know, and so like I felt like he meant comics to me.
Mhm.
So when he had, you know, when there was a book that said this is how you write a comic book and it's by Denny O'Neil, I was like, well, that's the guy to go to. So so I, you know, but I still didn't really, I wasn't confident. I didn't know what I was doing. Luckily, my editor, I said, look, can you just send me a script of like what your ideal script, like somebody who's written exactly, because there's no rhyme or reason in comics. There no everybody writes scripts differently, and like we're accustomed in TV to having particular formats. There's very specific ways to format your script and your story so that it's readable by a lot of people, and it's just not like that for comics. And so he did, though. He sent me a copy of one of Jeff Johns' Shazam scripts, and basically to this day, what I do is I have adapted Jeff Johns' style of writing a script in comics, just small tweaks here and there to kind of, as I've learned things over the years, the last couple of years. But that was the most helpful piece of the whole puzzle. And of course, when Jeremy came in, he's like, I don't know how to even I was like, hang on, I've got a script that you need to look at. So I sent him Jeff's script, which is really funny because then fast forward a little ways, and Jeremy and I had never met Jeff Johns, but we had this crazy idea for a Flashpoint sequel, and which, by the way, is not the story that we ended up doing in Flashpoint Beyond. It's a completely different story, but it started the ball rolling and got us in a room with Jeff Johns, who was so excited at the idea of doing a Flashpoint sequel that he said, I want to write issue 0. And then we started talking. He's like, you know what? I don't want to just write issue 0. I want to co-write the whole thing with you guys. Let's all do it together. And it was a lot like what Dan was trying to do. It was that idea of all the writers being in one room, like a TV writer's room, and working together. That's how we did Flashpoint Beyond.
Your name's right there.
Yeah, there it is. Jeff, Jeremy, and me. And I think that I want to believe that there was something about when he got scripts to look at from us, when Jeremy and I would write something and we'd show it to Jeff, he could read it easily because it was the way he wrote scripts, which I don't think he knew that we were writing basically a version of his way that he scripts, a comic book. But it only added to the ease and joy of working together. We had the best time doing that book.
Wow, that's a great story, man. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Jeff, for me, Jeff Johns, to try and get him on the show would be kind of like, he appears on screen and I have to wear sunglasses because it's like, oh, it's Jeff Johns,
Well, it was a little bit like that when we met him. Like we met him at lunch at the Smokehouse, which is this restaurant next to Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, and we're sitting at this table with Jeremy and I are these nerds, and we're sitting at this table with Jeff, and he's like, to us, he's the coolest guy ever, and he also kind of looks like, he would hate me saying this, but he looks now like he really takes care of himself, and he looks like the kind of guy who would have beaten us up in school in a lot of ways. But that's not who he is. We within 2 seconds we're talking, and he's such a nerd, and he's so much fun to talk about. He has so much joy for all of this stuff that he's a guy who doesn't need really to do comics, but he does, certainly not DC Comics. He's got his own stuff, his own now Ghost Machine, but he just loves it so much, and that's infectious.
Yes. When I watch him talk about comics too, I'm like, wow, and thankfully I actually was able to get in touch with I guess she's the publicist, and she arranged, once the writer's strike ended, I stayed in contact, and then we have a tentative date in January to interview Jeff.
Oh,
like super duper geeked. Like, I'm gonna freak out when he appears on the screen.
If I see him, I'm gonna tell him how much fun I had.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. We've had a lot of fun with everyone we've had on. Everyone from comics has been so cool. Like yourself, everybody's just been laid back, easy to laugh. So
yeah, we're just kind of all the same people, like, I think it's, sometimes I'll meet somebody, I'll be surprised by, sometimes we'll meet fans or somebody at a signing or something, and they'll be so, like, they don't understand why, like me or Jeremy, or like why we're approachable. Like they're just like, they almost feel like, you can tell that they're like sort of apprehensive, and we're like, come here. I've been going to Comic Cons since I was a kid, like I've gone to San Diego Comic Con for the past 23 years, as a fan. Like I didn't start working in this business until much later. I am, we're all just this. We're just very fortunate that we get to do this. And we get to work in this business, but we don't lose that. Jeff's the same way. Jeremy's certainly that way. And I think all these guys, everybody I meet, I was, talking to, I'd never sat down and talked to Tom Taylor or Josh Williamson until New York Comic Con. And like, I got some time with them, and they're the same way. They're just regular dudes who are just like, who love comics and are getting to work in comics, and they're really grateful. And I don't know, it's a nice energy to be around.
Sure. That's what Judd Winnick, when I interviewed him, great guy, Judd Winnick. We talked about Red Hood, the movie and the story, and adapting.
Yeah, he got to do the movie.
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
It was an awesome conversation, and he just was like a plethora of information and insights. And
wow.
The same
I've
thing
never
with
met
him.
Judd.
Really, really cool guy.
Yeah.
And he lives in San Francisco. You guys are at the same time. So he said, when I told him about, what I said, everybody I've met in comics has been cool. He's like, me too, pretty much everybody. And then I was like, except John Byrne. And then he laughed because like John Byrne's famous for being curmudgeon. But
I mean, there's curmudgeons, and there are curmudgeons and there are curmudgeons, I mean, I find that most of those folks end up being quite lovable, when you get to know them. I can't speak to John Byrne, but
Yeah. Scott, my co-pilot here, he could be very curmudgeonly. So he and I
so curmudgeonly that he won't show up for interviews.
Exactly. Right. What a guy.
What a guy.
and yet he and I bond over comics, so that he's a super lovable, good dude. So I appreciate that.
I'll tell you, if you talk to Adams, he will tell you that I am the ultimate curmudgeon. He would absolutely, he thinks, because he's powered by Red Bull. First of all, he has 6 before lunch.
Okay.
And he is so upbeat all the time that you can't help but look like a curmudgeon when standing next to him.
Okay. I understand.
If you don't drink Red Bull.
Sure. Woo! Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my reputation too. So this is why I find curmudgeons to be quite lovable, because I know that, in fact, we're all just really sweet.
Yeah.
And we're just standing next to the Jeremy Adamses who are, hopped up on Red Bull all day, 24/7.
And it just draws you out. It's like, you have to. I've seen him on Twitter, and a lot of people love his Flash run. I haven't read it yet.
Oh, but, really? I think you're gonna like it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a trade waiter now, just for the sake of space. So yeah.
How dare you?
I know,
ruining
right?
comics.
I know, I'm terrible. I'm not supporting the medium.
How dare you?
That's funny. And I must tell you, as far as being easygoing, like seeing you randomly at New York Comic Con, I was not expecting to see you. Like, at least in that
I was just hanging out too. I wasn't even
wait a minute. I know who you are.
Yeah, I had stuff I was going to do later on that day, but I was just walking around Artist Alley, saying hi, meeting people that I've never met in person that I've worked with, which was really cool.
Yeah,
that's what's great about New York. There's so many artists from Europe, and are there, and we work with a lot of those guys, and so it's my one chance to get to. I had never met Rafa Sandoval, and I
love his art.
We co-created Teen Titans Academy together. I mean, we worked together for many, many, many months. Although it's funny, like he didn't do all the issues. He didn't even, I don't even know how many he did ultimately. 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 issues, but he did a lot of covers for us. But we worked together for almost a year before the book came out, like designing characters, creating new stuff, and creating the world that we were going to be working in. But he was in Spain and I was in LA. And so we never had any face-to-face interaction until just now at New York Comic Con. I met him for the first time. It was great.
Awesome, man. That's way cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cool. Him and Jordy Tarragona. It was absolutely wonderful to meet those guys. And Tom Derenick too, who did a lot of work with me on Titans Academy. He was in New York, and it was so nice to actually connect face to face,
Sure. That's awesome, man. Well, thank you for sharing all that. I want to slow it down for a second, and we ask every guest this. This is
okay.
The thing.
I have no idea what's going to be what's coming.
Well,
right
here we go.
Terrified.
Have you met Rob Liefeld?
No,
you haven't.
Mm-mm.
Did you walk past his table at New York Comic Con, see him or anything?
I've walked around. I've seen him around a lot, but I've
You
never
just
actually
haven't.
met him.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's like our thing because we listen to his podcast, Rob
Oh,
Observations, and he's
yeah.
like a comic book historian. The guy's like a
Hmm.
plethora of information.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. Yeah.
really cool. And he's like,
Jeremy is always telling me I got to listen to that podcast.
oh, it's awesome, dude. It's awesome. And Rob, he has a really good way of sharing controversial things in an emotionless manner, just very matter of fact. Like he'll even share
Mhm.
things like, yeah, back in like, 1996 or 97, whatever, I Todd and I got into a legal battle with Image and but he doesn't like say he was this or that or I was this or that. He reads from like the Comics Journal, like interviews, of things he might have said and Todd said or what he said in Wizard and Todd said.
Yeah.
He tells stories like that, but then he also tells really good stories of like how certain stories came together with Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, such and such. Really good podcast. So
Yeah. 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 I'm constantly told that I never listen. I never listen to podcasts. I
well,
really
it's really good. Rob Observations.
Yeah.
I met him. He was at his table, and his line was just standing there, like 7 or 8 feet away from him. And this is right before Scott and I left on Thursday. And I'm like looking, and nobody's like being security or anything. So I kind of walk over real fast, and I'm like, "Hey, Rob Liefeld, nice to meet you." And he's like, "Oh, hey," and I'm like, "I love your podcast." He's like, "Thank you so much. That means the world to me." And he does an awesome Todd McFarlane impersonation that will have
Oh,
you
really?
cracking up. Oh, it's fantastic. It's great. So, all right. So
That's awesome.
yeah. So you passed that one. Um, so going back to the Long Halloween, because I love the story. I feel like I'm telling you something many people have told you already. And I really enjoyed your movie. And like I told you on Twitter, Scott liked your rendition better than the book.
Oh, well, he's a fool, but okay.
I was blown away because I like them both, but I can't say really which is better because it's just I'm
they're,
enjoying it
they're,
so much.
they're
It's
very
just like
different.
yeah, but it's just like extra gravy on mashed potatoes if you like mashed
That's right.
potatoes, just
I do.
it is what it is. But he really enjoyed it. And so when when did you get the call to do the Long Halloween? Like what were you working on something and you pick up the phone and you're like, who's this? What do you want me to do? Take me
No, I
back
mean,
to that time, please.
yeah, I was kicking around Warner Animation for a bit. So my first job working in TV was on a show called Justice League Action.
Uh-huh.
And I came in at the very end of it was only one season, like 52 episodes, something like that. They were all 11 minutes long. Like they were these 11-minute, cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
but it's surprisingly accessible to everyone. Like that
Mm-hmm.
show is fun for kids, but it's really fun for adults too. And it was because of the team that was making it. I mean, we just all kind of love telling jokes that will sort of make everybody laugh. And sometimes a joke might fly over the kids' heads, but it'll be funny for one reason because it's in a cartoon, but it'll be a little bit smarter and aged up, and that the adults and the parents in the room will get a good laugh out of it. So it's one of the great things about that show. So I was my first job, but I I had a knack for telling the stories that we were telling in the way that they were telling them. And Jim Krieg was the story editor on that show. Alan Burnett was running the show, and they gave me a shot. Like they had a whole team of writers, but for some reason they gave me a shot, which was wonderful. And I came in and I pitched them an episode. I pitched them like 5 episodes, but the first one I pitched them, they said let's make that. And it was a story about, like, my pitch was that the Flash has to, and this is so dumb, but that the Flash has to, everybody leaves on a mission, and the Flash has to stay at the watchtower to dog sit Crypto because he's the only one who can keep up with him. And it was just a really dumb joke that would open a door to have a lot of wacky, fun cartoon sort of stuff would happen with Crypto and the Flash. But they said, well, look, the Flash isn't like, it's not like the Bruce Timm show. The Flash isn't like comic relief on our show, Justice League Action. So can we make it Plastic Man? And I was like, absolutely, we can make it Plastic Man. So I wrote this episode and they loved it, and it went into production, and it's called Unleashed. And then I was like, well, that's all that I guess, I got this recurring theme where I always feel like, well, I guess that's all I'm ever going to do in this medium. So I'll see you later. And so I was like, I guess that was my one shot. And on my way out the door, I was like, guys, if you ever have any other episodes or anything else you want me to do, give me a call. And like, a week later, they called me and they come over because I lived right by the offices of Warner Animation. They said, come over right now. We're sitting in Alan Burnett's office. We're gonna work out we need a new episode. Let's work out a story and you can write it. I was like, okay. So I went over and we sat there and we came up with, this idea for an episode where Booster Gold is, on the sly giving tours of the Watchtower for profit, and nobody knows about it. And so it was a great fun. Like that, the show was so much fun. Yeah. The supervising producer of that show was a guy named Butch Lukic, and Butch had come up under Bruce Timm on Batman the Animated Series. He had directed, he did a lot of work on Batman Beyond, which is just an amazing show, and Superman. And Butch, once Justice League Action ended, Butch was going to make a movie, and there was this low-hanging fruit at Warner Brothers where like there's certain stories that just big stories that just had never been adapted for animation, and the lowest of the low-hanging fruit on that was The Long Halloween. No one wanted to attempt it because it seemed sort of impossible to adapt because of the way the story is structured. Certainly as a movie, like it makes sense if you think this could be an episodic, a 13 episode sort of matching the 13 issues series would have made sense, but that wasn't the business they were in. They were in the business of making these animated adaptations as movies. So Butch said, yeah, I'll make Long Halloween. Why not? and so by a miracle, I got the call to come in and do it. I think the miracle was they had done Batman Hush, right? And Jim Krieg knew that Hush was something that I was really into and wanted to adapt. I had done Reign of the Supermen with Jim for Warner Brothers. That was the first DC movie that I got to work on. And he knew through that process that Hush was something that I was really excited about. And when they did Hush, it had another writer, amazing writer, who's a great friend of mine named Ernie Altbacker. He got the gig and got to do that. And I think Jim felt bad. And Jim was a producer on The Long Halloween with Butch Lukic. And he's like, I guess he must have said, let's give Tim a shot, and he did such good work for us on Justice League Action, let's call him in, which tonally is a completely different thing than The Long Halloween. I mean, I was writing these ridiculous jokes about, Crypto, heat visioning his poop to, to evaporate it. I mean, those are that was the level of jokes I was telling. And then, and they said, no, they knew, they felt that I could do it. They felt like this was something that I could do. They knew I loved the book and I knew the book, and they trusted me. And so I came in, I met with them. We talked about it. I went away. I called them the very next day because that movie was supposed to be an 85-minute movie. And I called them the next day and I said, there is no way that I can do The Long Halloween in 85 minutes. If I'm doing that story in 85 minutes, there's going to have to be a murder every 2 minutes of the movie. If that, like, and it's going to be basically a snuff film at that point. Like, it's not really, it's not a story at that point. So they said, I said, I need to do this in at least 2 movies. And they said, okay.
And just like that, okay.
And I said, can I do 3? They said, no, you could do 2. So they said, we'll back you, and we're going to go and talk to the executives and see if they'll do it. And literally everybody in the whole process said, yep, do it. And it was the easiest thing in the world. And so now I had to write 2 movies, and I had to figure out how to do that. And it was challenging, but I've never felt more supported and more equipped and more myself than as a writer than when I was adapting that story. And adapting is such a weird word to use because in so many ways it's very different than the book, and it has to be. So I mean, for one, you don't benefit from the omniscient voice. Unless, you can do, narration in a movie like that. And we might have gotten away with it in The Long Halloween because it's supposed to feel like a detective noir story, which might have that sort of narrator voice of the detective telling you what's going on. But I tried writing it like that, and it just didn't work. It didn't feel like a movie anymore. It needed to live in the dialogue and in the characters and the relationships. So, I figured out a way to do it, and I did it, and I was terrified the whole way, and I wanted so much to talk to Jeff Loeb, who I never met.
Yeah.
And I brought it up with the producers, and they were like, yeah, we'll see if we can set up something. And then like it just never happened. And I kind of wonder if they just didn't want me to have, like, they didn't want, I think they probably felt he would get in my head. Like,
Sure.
like
Makes sense.
anything Jeff would have said about it would have been about his book.
Hmm.
And I was the guy doing the movie and movies, and they were going to be different things. So I'm glad, in one sense, in terms of my own process, I'm glad that it worked out that way. But speaking of the recent New York Comic Con, I got on the plane to come to New York from LA. I went down to LAX. It was like very early in the morning. I got on my plane, and I was seated in the very luxurious Economy Plus.
Hey.
Because I was going out of pocket, and I'm like, well, I'm not paying first class prices here. So I'm walking onto the plane, and I'm walking through first class, and I see Jeff Loeb sitting in first
Whoa.
class.
Yeah.
And that was my reaction, by the way. And I didn't know what to do because there's a whole line of people behind me trying to board the plane to take off on time. And if I stop right now to talk to Jeff Loeb, that's a big conversation.
Yeah.
I'd never met the man. And I've always felt like if I were Jeff Loeb, I would hate Tim Sheridan. I would hate anybody who took my book and made another thing out of it. I would hate them. So I was always like worried about how that interaction would go. So in that instant, when I kind of saw him, and I think he saw me, and for a split second, I thought, wait a minute, we've never met, but I think he recognizes me. And so I didn't know what to do. I averted my eyes, and I just kept walking onto the plane and got to my seat and sat down. I was terrified because I didn't know what to do. So a few days later, Jeremy Adams and I are walking through Artist Alley at New York Comic Con. And Jeremy, who is, as we've established, boisterous and hopped up on Red Bull at any given moment, sees Jeff Loeb walking towards us in Artist Alley. And he had once, years ago, he introduced himself to Jeff. And for Jeremy, who has a memory like for people and meetings like a steel trap, he thinks everybody else is that way too. So he
Yeah.
just thinks that Jeff's going to know who he is. So he
Yeah.
bounds up to Jeff with me in tow. And it's like, Jeff, it's Jeremy Adams. Hi, and Jeff, seemed to know Jeremy, which surprised me. I think he was maybe being nice, but I don't know. And I'm just panicking. And Jeremy says, I don't know if you know my friend Tim Sheridan. He had the chance to adapt The Long Halloween for animation.
And then you like swallow hard or what?
I'm like, what's about to happen? Is he going to take a swing at me? Like, what's going to happen? And so he turns to me slowly and looks at me and puts out his hand. He says, it's a real pleasure to meet you. Actually,
Oh.
the first thing he says is, oh, I know who you are. That's what he said.
Oh.
He said, I know you are. It's a real pleasure to meet you. And I, not knowing what to say, I said, as I'm shaking his hand, I pulled in a little bit closer and I said, I'm sorry. Because honestly, if somebody took my book and did something, adapted it, made it another thing, and changed some stuff and, whatever, I would probably want them to say, I'm sorry, the first time we meet. And then we'd be fine,
Mm-hmm.
And, that man, that sweet man, Jeff Loeb, said, oh, you have nothing to be sorry about. And he said, and also you said some really nice things about the book when you were out promoting the movie, and I really appreciate that. And I said, oh my gosh, I said, it comes from the heart. It was a labor of love. I love that book. And what I wanted to do was make a movie that would get people to pick up the book again or pick it up for the first
Awesome.
time
Awesome,
and
dude.
celebrate it. And so that was our interaction. And it turned out I didn't need to be scared. He was a real gentleman and a class act. And I was a scared little boy.
No, I appreciate that very much. And the way you explain that, you're a natural storyteller, man. You have me like going along with you, and I'm like, and then awesome. Awesome. Man, thank you so much for sharing that. So did you get the
That's the
feeling
first
that
time I've told that story, by the way. That's an exclusive for
I'm gonna
you.
put that in the thumbnail? Thank you much. I appreciate it. I'm gonna be like, Tim Sheridan explains the long conversation about the long Halloween. Tim
It
Sheridan.
was such a short conversation too between me and Jeff.
Yeah.
I'd love to hang out with him though. And
But
and
did
we don't even have to talk long Halloween.
but did
I
you
just
get the
want to hear.
sense that he just knew that you said nice things, or did you get the sense that he probably watched the movie?
I don't know. Jeff Johns had told me once that Jeff had watched the movie and that he really liked it.
Oh, okay.
And I said, you're a liar. I said, there's no way. There's no way that he watched that movie and just like really liked it. Because I feel like I could never watch somebody adapt my stuff and like it. I would have all kinds of issues with it. And that would be fine. Like that's a totally normal reaction for somebody to have when you make something and somebody else comes in and tries to like kind of retell your story. That's a totally normal reaction. It would be a very strange reaction to just love the movie and say great things.
I wish I thought of that, Tim. Hey, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Jeff had told me that, and I still think he's a filthy liar for telling. I don't think it's true, but it was Tim Sale before he passed said some nice things about the movie, and that's you can't ask for anything more than for those guys to feel like you took care of it, that you were a good steward of this child of theirs that they created, this thing. So ultimately I feel really good about it. I'm very proud of those movies, and but they will never match my love for that, will never match my love for the book. So
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing that about Jeff, about Tim Sale. So do you and Jeff have each other's email now? Like you can email
Jeff
Jeff on,
Loeb?
yeah, and be like, hey buddy.
No, we didn't exchange info. But it's a small community.
Sure.
I probably ought to reach out to him and just thank him for being so gracious. I think that's probably what I'm about to do next.
I see a lot of pros, on John Suntress's channel.
Yeah.
And like Jeff was just on there. And like I haven't heard him in an interview in years because he's been working, for Marvel TV. So John had a really good conversation with him. I think he's been on the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast because they get a lot of guys like Jeff and Phil Hester and like Ron Mars and stuff. Roger Stern. So that's interesting. I would love.
I did John's podcast for the first time recently, and he is the nicest guy.
Yeah, and he's a natural
such a
interviewer
sweetheart
too.
Yeah, he's so equipped. It's all recall for him. He's got it all ready to go. I would imagine that guy doesn't even have to prepare.
Yeah.
Like he just gets to walk right in. He's always that guy.
Yeah.
But what a sweetheart. Like, there's a reason why everybody does his show.
Yes. He's on my, I subscribe to his channel. So I remember you being on there. That's fantastic. Thank you. So when you sit down to do the long Halloween, you're sitting at your laptop and so you have the assignment, right? And you're like, okay, day one, first 2 minutes, like you sit down, are you struck with fear and anxiety, or are you like overwhelmingly excited? What's the first thing you put down on your typing? Like what do you type?
Every writer is different on this. I am someone who is not at all intimidated by the blank page. Just
Okay.
like a lot of people fear that blank page and don't know how to start.
Yes.
And there's a certain amount of yeoman's work that you do, preparation that you do to get into it. And so when you for me, when I build some structure around my actual script that I'm working in Final Draft, not to plug a screenwriting program, but that's the one kind of most of us use. um I have a bunch of information and a bunch of work that's that I've amassed that I bring into it when I start. So I by that point I've done outlines, and the
Of
outlines.
the book of the movie.
Well, the first thing I've done is reread the book,
Right.
and then started
So do you
picking
have the
out.
book next to you,
Yeah,
like a
always.
reference? Okay. Okay.
Always, yeah. And I even had Dark Victory, next to me always, like it was, and the Halloween specials as well. Like I just had all that stuff like just ready, because there were things, if you watch the movies, there's stuff in there that comes from, certainly from the Halloween specials. There are bits and pieces from those things that made it into the movie. Some of it's dialogue, some of it's themes, some of it's just other small little ideas or what have you, bridging material. I wanted to make sure, if I was like, before I went and made something up to try to connect something or make something make sense, that the first thing I did always was go back to Jeff and Tim and see, do they have something that I can just pull from and incorporate into the script. um so yeah, so I've done all that research, research, and I have that in my brain, and I've made a lot of notes, what the
No,
themes are that I want
I'm
to.
sorry to interrupt you,
Sure.
but when you say notes, like, are you putting things like, all right, like number one, blah blah blah, number two, blah blah blah, and then going back and like, all right, well, I'm gonna bring number five up to number two now, and this and that. Like,
uh it's a little bit, oftentimes that will be the case in other projects, but let's
mhm.
talk about, speaking Long Halloween specifically.
Okay.
The notes that I was making, early on, the first things I'll do is just make sort of thematic notes, things like, these are ideas that I want to make sure I communicate, things, this relationship, this line of dialogue, this represents a big portion of the story, so I think it's important to remember this. And so there's a lot of just amorphous ideas. It's a collage of ideas that are the first sort of group of words that are on the page for me, in just my notes. In terms of structure, though, like to your question, there, when you're breaking a story, you'll often have like a scene, and you'll, that scene 5 that you'll end up moving up to scene 2, or move it around on the board, to a better place where it needs to live. But Long Halloween's a little bit different because of the very strict calendar structure of the story,
Yeah, yeah,
which
true.
was the reason why I had to make it 2 movies. It made it very simple. The way it was laid out and structured, it made it very simple. And this is where Jeff Loeb took care of me as a writer. It's very simple to then know, well, I know exactly what I have to do here, and I know exactly what I have to do next, because there's a reason why we're on these holidays. The book is genius, because it's not just about a murder that is themed around a holiday on a holiday. The entire story in that issue is themed around that holiday. Mother's Day is dealing with the thoughts about Martha and about mothers in general. We expanded a little bit in the movie. Those kinds of things. That's the genius of that book, I think. One of the many genius things about that book. So you kind of just know what you have to do next structurally. But I built an outline for how it was going to work for the movie. And then those, that all gets noted through the process. Like that goes to my producers, then it goes up to Mike Carlin, who was overseeing animation at DC at the time. He recently retired, but he was the
Oh,
guy
you
who we
retired?
sent everything to.
Yeah.
And so he would read it and he would give notes. And miraculously, the first time and only time this has ever happened, he was sending those outlines back with no notes, saying,
Oh,
this is great, like, this is it, do it, keep going, and so it was like, this is what I mean. I was so I felt like we were all firing on all cylinders and everything was just working according to the way we wanted it to work. The only wrench that ever got thrown into that process was when they told us, hey, Matt Reeves is going to do Long Halloween. So now you guys have to, hold up, slow your roll a little bit. And we're like, wait, what? But that was after I was already done scripting it. So, so, um, so that's it. So then when it comes time to actually write the script, yeah, I sit down with the blank page in front of me and I will incorporate what I did on this movie that I had never done before, and I do now all the time, is I had structured my outlines with the slug lines, which are like, you know, interior Wayne Manor study night. I had done the outline like that. So every slug line, and I just had a little description of what was going to happen in that scene, which was made it very easy to then take that and incorporate it into the script. I just dropped it in. I knew what slug line I was working with. I knew what the story was for that scene, and then I started just writing the scene.
So that was one of the things I wondered, because I'm like, all right, I know Tim wrote the dialogue and whatnot, but I was like, did Butch tell you like, all right, it's going to be raining in the scene, or was that you setting the stage for it?
Most of
Like
that
you're saying.
stuff, yeah, most of that. I mean, look, there's always a dialogue happening with me
Mhm,
and Butch through the whole process.
mhm.
A lot of stuff got into the script because Butch is like, I want a scene like this. Let's do this
Okay.
scene like this thing. So I will go, okay, great. And I'll figure out how to make that work in terms of the story and in terms of the structure. And maybe it's something that isn't in the book, but we really expand, like sometimes you had to expand some of the action sequences
Sure,
because in a movie there's a certain pace and a certain rhythm and you
sure.
need to sort of hit some action beats. So we had a fun cat and mouse chase with Catwoman early on in the story, and there's subway trains involved, and it's this just fun, climbing this building, and it's really fun action beat. Pieces of that are in the book, but we really just blew it out and expanded it because Butch said, here, I want to make sure we really do a fun chase sequence here. And then also like the Batmobile. I don't even think the Batmobile, I don't remember now for the life of me if the Batmobile is even in the Long Halloween book ever. Is it? I don't remember now. But
Off the top of my head, I can't say.
yeah, I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember it if it ever appears in the book. And if it does, it's brief. It must be because we needed to have a car. We needed to have, and so that meant we were going to have a big car chase to open up like act two of the story. So some of the, this is just this constant dialogue happening. So it is very collaborative in that sense. But then I go into my office and I shut the door and it's just me and my keyboard and my screen, and I'm crafting what the thing is going to be. And then it goes to Butch and Jim, and they'll make notes and they'll send it back and they'll say more of this, less of this, maybe change this. We don't need this section, but we do need something like this, So that's how all movie making and TV really works.
I'm fascinated because well, number one, I'm just fascinated of just how you made this wonderful thing. And then second is like, I've thought to myself, how does one even begin to write a screenplay? Because I've seen comic scripts, like you mentioned, Jeff's. So
Mhm.
I've seen like, all right, this is how I would write it if I were to do that, if I ever wanted to get crazy. But like
Yeah.
a screenplay is like, how does one write a screenplay? Like, what does that consist of?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we all study it. We read books and we learn how to do it, but mostly we learn by doing. And we just get out there and do it. And I had really great mentors, I mean, I'm writing the Long Halloween at a point where I had written with Jim Krieg and with Alan Burnett, producing, and James Tucker directing, um, or producing, but and Sam Liu directing. I had done the Reign of the Superman,
Yes.
and so I've been through a process, and that was a talk about. I mean, one of the things that came out. I love the Reign of the Superman story in the comics, and one of them, and Mike Carlin, who was editing Superman comics, that was his story,
Yes.
and he was the guy we were sending the scripts and the outlines to, and he was giving very great constructive feedback, and it was very helpful. But he still was able. This is talk about people who are gracious. he was still able to, when we made big sweeping changes to Reign of the Superman that we had to make it a movie, and to make it a movie that fit into James Tucker's universe of movies. Mike said, great, sounds good, let's do it. He was so encouraging and so helpful through the process. So that was a big thing that I learned, and I knew that he was always going to be there and be a great help to us. But I had gone through that thing once. I'd gone through the grind of that. I'd also written some Scooby-Doo movies and stuff like that. And, I'd done the process of writing a screenplay for animation. And so I had a little bit of work. I got to sort of work out some of the bugs of that process doing those things. But I knew when I sat down, I knew when I got the job on Long Halloween, I said, this is going to be for me and my career and my advancement and development in the craft, this is going to be the most important thing I've ever done.
Sure.
And it was at the time. It really it was, and I treated it like that, and I tried to treat it with as much care and respect that it deserved. The process, not just the book that we were working from, but that very process. Butch Lukic. It's a great story about Butch. When we started, we had Butch. Butch. Yeah. When we started doing when we started working on the movie, he came to me one day and he said, "You can't do Scooby-Doo movies anymore." And I said, "Why?" I mean, because I love Scooby-Doo. I love writing those movies. I love writing those jokes. I mean, they're the dumbest mysteries, but like they're just fun to write. I love those characters. Their voices live in my brain rent free because I grew up like everybody did with Scooby-Doo. And they're just a fun puzzle to solve, and I make money doing it, right? So like, why would I not do that? And he said, because when we premiere Long Halloween in San Diego, I can't introduce you as the guy that wrote Scooby-Doo.
Yes.
And he wasn't wrong. Like, it helped sort of lead me to the idea that, well, this is actually a really important work that I'm like, this is an important part of my career that I'm embarking on. So I should probably start thinking about what it's going to mean, what I can take from it, what I can do after this. And fast forward to so the third movie we did together, but ended up being the first one that got released, me and Butch, was Superman Man of Tomorrow. And that premiered, unfortunately, during COVID lockdown. So we were supposed to premiere in San Diego at Comic-Con, but we couldn't. Long Halloween was supposed to premiere in San Diego at Comic-Con as well, but we had still in lockdown and we couldn't do it. So I missed my big San Diego premieres. I've never had one, except for a Scooby-Doo. I did have a Scooby-Doo, but it wasn't as big as the DC ones. But so the actor Matt Bomer, who was from Doom Patrol, was moderating our panel that we were doing for the DC fandom event that they did, which kind of in place of Comic-Con. It was an online event, awesome. Right? And so he was moderating our panel. We pre-recorded it. And so there's a bunch of us, and we're all on Zoom, and Matt Bomer's there, and he's been given a script. And the very first thing, they say action, the very first thing, and Butch is there, at his house, and I'm at my house, and he starts introducing us. And the very first person he introduces is me. And he says, writer of Scooby-Doo and the Gourmet Ghost. And Butch goes, cut. And so they cut. And he goes, what did I tell you? So we were laughing, and we changed it to credit Justice League Action. He said writer of Justice League Action and Reign of the Supermen.
There you go.
I mean, I love Scooby-Doo, but I understand that thematically, and like in terms of like, our movie was rated R.
Yeah.
Long Halloween. So it's not exactly the Scooby-Doo crowd that should be sort of, our audience on that one. So Butch was right. And but I've still managed to get my hands into some writing some Scooby-Doo stuff here and there.
Sure. Well, when you're telling that story about I can't have you as the guy who wrote Scooby Doo, it made me think of like Michael Keaton was Mr. Mom, and people were like,
Yeah.
Mr. Mom,
Yeah.
and freaking
Yeah.
out.
How
So
can
yeah,
Beetlejuice be Batman?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was
Um,
before the internet. Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
and it was still bad. It was wild for him, that was a tough thing. But yeah, I mean, nobody cares who the writer is, but I think there is something to like, if somebody did recognize my name from Scooby-Doo movies and they picked up the Long Halloween for their kids because,
Like,
oh, that Tim
oh,
Sheridan writes a fun
and this is a
and
cartoon.
it's
Yeah.
rated R and there's murder every 5 seconds, and so that probably wouldn't have been good.
Well, I'll tell you, I think my favorite scene in it is when the Joker goes into Falcone's bedroom and ties him up, and he gives him a kiss on the head, and he's like,
Really,
"Bon
Carl?
Natale."
Is a
Yeah.
splash of color too much to ask?
Yeah.
He's going through his suits. He's like charcoal,
Yeah.
gray, navy.
Yeah. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
when you're writing those, do you hear a certain actor that you are familiar with, or
Yeah, absolutely. You only hear Mark Hamill. I
right,
only hear Mark Hamill.
right,
When
and
but I will say Troy Baker, who
does it?
plays Joker in The Long Halloween, has his own Joker, but it's inspired by Mark.
Yes, very much so.
And it's difficult for me now because I also hear Troy,
Yes.
and he's a genius.
Mhm.
So, I've also worked with Mark on Masters of the Universe. So now he's kind of Skeletor for me. So it's a little bit, Troy's sort of taken over as Joker voice in my head.
I appreciate that. Did they tell you who the voices were going to be at any particular point, or was it just kind of like you found out when it was done?
Yeah, we didn't cast it until it was scripted. So they don't normally don't for those movies. So we didn't know who was going to be playing who. So there was no way to write to their voice. So I was just writing for Mark Hamill, knowing that the part wasn't up to snuff for Mark. I mean, the Joker is not the star of
Right.
the movie. He definitely takes a larger role in part one. Um, excuse me, but it's Mark Hamill playing Joker. Like he needs a real Joker movie, and this was never going to be that. So I never dreamed that we'd actually have him. And by the way, I don't even know, like, it's not that Mark turned it down or anything. Like I think it was, I don't even think anybody even went to him because, they knew that it was not going to be the most Joker centered thing. I also think he had kind of retired from Joker or voice acting or something at that moment. We brought him back with Masters of the Universe though. So that was exciting.
Yes.
But yeah, so I didn't know, but I got to go to a lot of the record sessions, and there were some people, well, I mean, I can't tell you anybody who didn't knock my socks off. Jensen Ackles, the second that he said his first line, which was the very innocuous, "Is there coffee?" It's his first line.
Is there coffee?
And is there coffee? But he did it. And I was like, and I'm looking around at everybody in the booth, and I'm just like, we got it. This is it. He's the guy. And he was so good. He was so good. I mean, he just put it on like a pair of old boots that, he knew exactly who that character was, and he knew how to do it. It was great. And the Troy, like I said, who was unreal, just a whirling dervish to watch in the booth while he's doing his thing. Titus Welliver as Carmine Falcone was,
he crushed it. He crushed
he
it.
did. He
And
did.
you
I
got like
didn't know what to expect. I love him, but I was like, oh, I don't know if I can hear him in the role, and now I can't hear anybody else. He's so good.
Right.
Yeah. And the late Naya Rivera, who we lost before the movie came out, but she was so delightful. She was so excited to be there. And she was so happy to be doing this thing that she knew her son would get to enjoy someday. And she was absolutely a joy. Absolutely a joy. I'll tell you the one who I probably underestimated because I'm a jerk is Josh Duhamel. I didn't know that Josh Duhamel could do what he did.
I agree with you.
He made me into an instant fan. that
Me too.
I'll to my dying day, I will sing the praises of Josh Jamel, who's a very fine actor, like really terrific, an actor's actor, very good. And he carries that whole movie. He has to. He's
Yes.
Harvey Dent and Two-Face, you know. And I don't think anybody could have expected. That's a hard role. He
Yeah.
just nailed it
And I don't
from day
remember,
one.
I don't recall him in any other animation projects either. So, like, was that his first one?
Don't
Do you
I
remember?
hadn't worked with him, but I don't know that I don't know if he had done
Because
any other ones
I didn't
before.
remember hearing him in anything else. And I was like, wow, if this was his first go round, he crushed it with just his voice.
You know who else though was David Desmalchin.
Oh yeah, Dave. Yeah,
So
he was
I
so creepy.
he's so creepy. So I go in and we're sitting there and he's doing his thing. And it was terrifying and creepy and wonderful. And it wasn't at all the way that I had imagined it,
Yeah.
but he was perfect,
Yes.
perfect, and so perfect. And he was such a delight. He's such a nice guy. I mean, everybody who's ever met the man
Yes.
will tell you, like, he's a absolute delight. Um, he and to the point where I was scripting part two when we were recording him during part one, and I ran home that day and started restructuring the thing so that I could add at least one more scene for him,
It's awesome.
because I knew, like, I wanted more Calendar Man in that
Yeah.
movie now. And people were gonna, no, there wasn't a lot of room for it, but
Mhm.
he needed something else. And so I ended up giving him this this little Taco Tuesday beat, which towards in part two, that was really fun. And you know, he, of course, and every line he just he nailed it, he crushed it. He also ended up voicing Penguin for us, who had a couple of lines
Oh,
in that movie as well.
well,
So
I loved his.
he's delightful. By the way, I recently was at Bob's Big Boy in Burbank, California, and I'm staying there waiting to get in to be seated. It was very crowded, and David Desmalchin walks up from outside. This is how many? This is like 5 years since we recorded him in, and I haven't seen him since then. He comes up and he's like, and he throws his arms out and he comes over and he gives me a huge hug. And I was like, how do you even remember me? You know, I was just the writer, like, nerd in the room, like, you know, but he's one of those people who just remembers everybody and is a loving force. And, you know, sweet man.
Yeah. I appreciate that story too. My favorite part is when when he's talking to Batman and he's like, what a joke, like that. And then Batman's like, the Joker, like that.
Giving him a clue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was,
He's
dude, the way he delivered
laying
that
it
was just
on.
like perfect. It was so
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh yeah.
Now,
He just nailed everything. He was so good.
now me, when I'm reading the story and then watching the movie, it's like everybody knows who the killer is, apparently, except Batman and the reader. And so, was there a particular, when you were writing the movie, did your mind say, "Oh, it's this person and this person and that person and that person"? Like, did you have your own understanding of it based
Yeah.
on
I mean,
writing it?
well, Jim, and this is the most important part of the whole process. Like, Jim and I
Mhm.
sat down before I ever started writing anything, and we talked about the solution to the mystery. And because in our mind, the way we read it, it was we thought it was vague. We thought it
Mhm.
was not clear. You know, we didn't think that you could rely on what Two-Face tells you at the end of the movie as being the truth. And then there's the scene with Gilda, and it just makes you think that, you know, you have to question everything at that point and wonder who's telling the truth, what really happened. um, we decided that we needed to put a finer point on it than the book. The book can get away with leaving it a little open for the
Mhm.
reader. I think the movie, I think, wouldn't have been as satisfying for people who didn't read the book, who hadn't read the book. They needed to feel like there was a solution. They needed to feel like they were watching an Agatha Christie movie at the end, when, you know, or when Poirot tells you, you know, and this is who did it, right? This is who done it. Um, and that was something Jim Krieg felt really strongly about, and he was right, I think. And so we just decided to get very clear about it, and point the finger to, spoiler alert, Gilda, um, and not leave really any question there as to, for you know, as to who the holiday killer is or was. The other big change that we made, which was a great surprise twist in the book, it worked so beautifully in the book, but it worked so well that there was no way we were going to be able to do it and do it in a way that surprised anybody.
Okay.
Was Alberto Falcone
Right.
being alive and coming back later on in the story. Spoiler alert. um and so I committed to, and I convinced everybody that we should kill Alberto and make it gory and to the point where you can't even question. In
Right.
fact, it's so much gorier in the script than it is in the final product.
Really?
Yeah, there's no question.
Like that was a novice idea, but it like was perfect. It's like, oh yeah, the big spinner on the boat just chops him up. Oh, okay, yeah,
chops
wow.
him up, and like in the script, you see his head. Like it's it's gross. It's really gross, and there's no question he's dead. And that's how we end part one. And I thought the people who've never read the story, who don't know what's coming, will think, whoa, what a wild ending for this movie. I'm very interested to see what happens next. And people who'd read the story and who knew what was going to happen with Alberto in the book would be like, wait, what is going to happen?
That was my
There were a
reaction.
lot of people who believe that Alberto is the holiday killer from when they read the book. And he certainly makes an argument for, at times he is the holiday killer, but I was like, no, if we're gonna make a change to clarify who the holiday killer is, let's really put our money where our mouth is. Let's just go for this and be clear about it. I don't know. I don't know if it worked, but it is in terms of there was only like a month difference, I think, between part one and part two being released. It was originally going to be a lot longer, but so I don't know that there was much long to really linger. Wasn't a lot of time to linger with that cliffhanger, but
Well,
but
I thought the first
but you
one,
were probably waiting for Alberto to come back in the movie, right?
well, when I saw him get killed like that, I was like, whoa. So Alberto's not coming back. So who
Oh,
is
okay.
like
Oh,
so
good. So
it
you
worked.
felt okay. Good. So it
Right,
did
right.
it did
Because
feel gory enough. Yeah.
the first one I thought was I was like, all right, it's Gilda because he comes home and he finds her like with all the cigarettes, drinking the wine. He comes in and she's like, like as if she's like stuck in her thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So I thought she was one, Harvey was one, Alberto, just based on the book was one. And so I thought there were three in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
But
mean, that's what the book sort of does for you. It
right,
makes you think Alberto, Gilda, and Harvey are all the holiday killer at a certain point. I mean, Harvey really, when he's Two-Face at the end, killing Falcone is the last act of the holiday killer, I think that's how he puts it. But there's an argument for the fact that it was Gilda all along,
right.
so in the book. So it's difficult to say. Um, I I also, like, you talk about that first appearance of Gilda, you know, I wonder.
But did I read it right?
In
Like
that,
in that like she was had all the cigarette butts because there's a shot of the cigarette butts. She's
yeah, I
drinking
mean,
wine and then he spooks her by like, oh my god, what?
yeah,
What?
I mean that first scene is to set up a couple of things, which are, first of all, like the thing that you're supposed to really sort of take from that scene, I think,
Mhm.
is what it's all, I said it all on Halloween night, which isn't exactly the way the book starts and how it works. Um, and there's this, my idea for the movies was that it was a story about Gotham City and what Gotham City as a creature does to the families that built Gotham City and that make it run.
Mhm.
And so the Waynes, the Gordons, the Falcones, and the Dents. And sort of we see all of these families, and we start with all of those families at the beginning. We start at Wayne Manor. We see the Gordons, we see the Dents. We don't get to see the Falcones quite yet. I mean, we sort of do, but that's going to come a little later. And so that scene was about introducing the Dents and how they were upended as a family unit by by Gotham City, by the work that Harvey was having to do. He was being kept away from home. Gilda was left on her own. She was going through her own mental health crisis that he couldn't really understand or be there for, because he was too busy trying to clean up Gotham City and couldn't see what was going on right in front of his face. So that first scene is about showing Harvey's call to duty to help as the White Knight of Gotham, and Gilda being sort of left behind and dealing with a crisis that is going undealt with by certainly in her relationship with her husband, but she's also she's found a way to deal with it outside of her family, which is as the Holiday Killer, which we learn later on. But so that's what that scene's about. And you should feel when you watch that scene that something's going on with Gilda. But a lot of people hopefully watch that scene and go, what's going on with Gilda is that she wants to have a different life with her husband, and she can't because he's too busy at work all the time, and he's not there, and he's not being an active participant in their relationship, but it turns, really her issues, her scars, or the things she's dealing with are not that at all. Like they're such bigger. They're so much deeper, and she's carried them into the marriage. In fact, it turns out really she married him as a way of dealing with the trauma that she had experienced at the hands of the Falcones. That's something that we added to the film.
Yeah, because I didn't remember that in the story. I was like, oh, that was clever.
We felt like we needed to support the idea of why she does what she does. I mean, she's mentally ill, certainly, but there are other reasons. There are things that drove her there, and it has to do with the other families of Gotham City, specifically in this case the Falcones. So that you see that family dynamic is the thing that carries through the entire movie. I mean, Bruce ends up in a really tough spot as he's sort of reconciling what his family meant to the city, and what he's fighting for. And he comes to feel that maybe they help to legitimize the Falcones in a way that taints their legacy. And so what is he really fighting for? Is he fighting in their honor, or is he fighting to redeem them? And that's what he's grappling with by the end of the story. And these are things that I think are in the book, but they're it's a great work of literature, and there are subtle themes and threads that are in there that when you're doing a movie have to sort of get a brighter light shown on them and be told in a way that the audience can follow along. And it's not like you can sit with that panel for a while and consider why does he look the way he looks, and why does he use these particular words, and then say, oh, he's dealing with his feelings about his family maybe, and the way they're connected to Gotham City. But like, you can't do that in a movie because the movie keeps going. If you stop and start thinking about that, you've missed the next 3 minutes of the movie. So there's a different way that we have to tell the story.
Wow, thank you for that. When do you know that you're done? Like, when you put the story together, you're like, all right, I got the notes, I've done all this, they seem to like it, I'm done.
It makes it very simple, because there's the contract is like a specific step deal where you're like, you do so many drafts of the script, and then once you've done that last draft, they're not paying you anymore. So okay. so there's so to answer your question, it's never done. Okay. Like, I never feel like it's done. The only reason why any of the stuff we ever do as writers or as creators or producers or anything, the only reason why stuff ever gets made is because there's a deadline. There's a point when you just have to stop and then put it out there. And so, I wish that I could walk away from it and crack my knuckles and say, I've done well, it's complete. No, nothing I've ever done will I ever feel that. I don't think I will never feel that way about anything I ever do. But glory be, praise be, we have deadlines and we have dates certain. And that means that we just have to get on with it.
Sure.
And what it is at the time when it goes into production that's what it's going to be, and then it evolves even in production too. And then in scripts, in comics, comics evolve, as the artist starts working on it. And then when the letterer works on it, there are pieces and parts of the process that evolve the thing along the way. So it's even when you're done, it's not done. And then it gets into the hands of readers or into the eyes of viewers, and they have their interpretation of it. And you're going out and you're selling it to people, and you're telling them about what the movie is, and you're doing interviews and podcasts like this one. And the work never really ends. It's funny. Like, certainly the fact that we're even talking, about Long Halloween is funny to me, because it came out a couple of years ago, and it's like, it's out there in the world, and I'll talk about it until my dying day, happily, because I love it. I love
And
the
you should.
story. I love the
Very
book
good.
so much, and I loved that process so much, and I'm very proud of that movie. But I feel like, everybody must have moved on by now. Like, let's there's
That,
sometimes.
dude, that was my concern about talking to you, because I was like, oh man, Tim did this how long ago? Is he going to be as engaged? But I love it. Your
I
enthusiasm
think
is still
I
there. Thank
I
you.
feel like I always thought I started writing it in 2017, but I didn't. I think it was
Wow.
2018
Wow.
when I started working on it. I think I might have known about it in 2017. I don't know, but it was it was a while ago.
Wow. That is awesome, dude. Well, I got to tell you, I've bought the movie 3 times. I bought part one, I bought part two, and then I bought the
The deluxe
deluxe
edition.
edition. This is what I really wanted, but there was no
Yeah.
way I could go like however long without getting this, without
You
like
know,
watching them.
but the thing about the deluxe edition, which I have behind me too,
Mhm.
the thing about it is that's not on HBO Max,
No, it's
and
not.
there are a few little things that that don't work the same way as they do in part one and two when you watch those movies the way they are on Max. So I love that exists, and there's only one way you can get it, which is to watch it on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Um, they did that with so Reign of the Supermen was the sequel to
I
Death of Superman, and they
I
put
did
out
the same
this
thing. Yeah.
edition,
I bought one,
which there,
two, and
Death and
then
Return.
three. Yeah. The deluxe edition with the figurine too, the
Hmm.
John Henry Irons. Yep.
But they put that one in theaters, the Death
They
and
did.
Return. It was a Fathom Events thing, and
What was I
so
doing?
I got to watch that on the big screen in the theater with a bunch of my friends, and it was the coolest thing ever. I was like, it was my first DC movie, my second movie that I'd ever done, and there it is up on the big screen. Like, it was the coolest thing.
That's cool. See, I saw the Killing Joke in the theater, and that
I
was
did
cool.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was way cool. I was blown away that they actually did that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
those Fathom Events things were great. Like, it gave you a real chance to experience those movies in a different way. And I really feel like I wish, Long Halloween came out, we were in COVID lockdown and stuff. And
Mhm.
I told people at Warner Brothers, I'm like, there were no movies in theaters. Like, I said, we should just rent out a theater and for wallet, put it in a theater here in Hollywood and play it for the weekend on the big screen. And first of all, we'll be the number one movie in the country because
Hey,
whoever put a
seriously,
movie out was the number
seriously.
one movie in the country.
Uh-huh.
So we'll get press from that, but also we'll get to experience it on the big screen in the theater with people who want to see it that way. And or even if we do a drive-in, I don't care, whatever we have to do. But it just wasn't in their plans for marketing. They couldn't figure out how to do it at the time. Everybody was trying to catch up and keep up with stuff back then. But it would have been really cool. I would have loved to have gotten to see that movie. Part one, at least, would have premiered in San Diego on the big screen,
Yeah.
in the room full of, in the friendliest room in animation,
Mhm.
which and certainly the friendliest room at DC, which is that Ballroom 20. Whenever in San Diego, when they premiere those animated films, it's an incredible experience, and it in fact is what brought me into this job. I, as a fan, sat in the back of Ballroom 20 many years ago and watched the Flashpoint Paradox movie. And I was, I couldn't take my eyes off it. And I was, my jaw was open the whole time. And I walked away and I told my friends that I was there with, I said, that's what I want to do. And then only a few years later, I was working on Reign of the Supermen with the people that made Flashpoint Paradox.
Mhm.
So I don't know how I managed to do that. But it wasn't me that did it. Like, it was an amazing cosmic force that managed to lead me to that place. But that's, that was it. I knew what I wanted to do from watching that movie in that room. And I'm so sad I haven't gotten to have my movies there. Someday, maybe.
No, I'm sure you'll have another project. Thank you very much for sharing that. I also enjoyed the extra 30-minute special feature on here
Mm.
with you and the lovely Drea Letamendi. We had her on the show,
Oh,
and
good.
she was just awesome, and she could,
Yeah.
like, we had to tell her, all right, we got to go. Like, she would have kept going and going and going. She was a ball of insight and just a fascinating human being.
I wish they would put a panel with me and her talking about the psychology, all the psychological stuff in this movie,
Yes,
because I
I
have a
would love
lot
that.
to
That's a
say
great
about it.
idea.
She's got a lot of interesting stuff to say about it. That would be so cool. We haven't done that. Just you've never been in the same room.
Well, when this video gets edited, I'll tag her in it and be like, BTW. It would be great if you and Tim got together and did a panel about the psychology of Long Halloween. She'd
Maybe
love
on
it
an
too.
Anniversary of the release or something. We'll do
That
something like
would
that. You know what
that
else
would
we never, we never got to do?
well,
There's no audio, there's no commentary track for Long
no,
Halloween.
there's not. There's
It
not.
makes me so sad. I know Chris Palmer, the director, and who's a good friend. We talk about it all the time. We're like, yeah, put us in front of a microphone. Let us talk about it. That's why I love talking about it on podcasts, because I never really get a chance to talk about the whole thing. I probably should just sit down with a microphone with a couple of people from the production and watch the movie and just record us talking about it as our own commentary track, just for fun. But I don't want to run afoul of my friends at Warner Brothers. So
Well, number
maybe
one,
they're
if you
planning it
did
for
that, I
future
would
edition.
I would listen and download it. And then number two, if you if they said yes, let's do that, and they put out another disc, I would buy the disc again just to hear that. I really would.
I bet you would. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. I would put it out there. If I was me, I'd just put it out there on YouTube and let people enjoy it. Of
Yeah,
course, you gotta, like, start your movie at the right time, in order
yeah.
to
Be like,
sync it up. But
ready, everybody, count to two. One,
yeah,
two, play. Yeah.
that's exactly all right. So it's probably better if it's on a disc. But the good news is I'm going to be going out to doing a lot of cons now. Um, I'm finally going to be going out and doing like, I'm going to be at LA Comic Con, but I think I'm going to be going to Portland. I'm going to go like Toronto and Cleveland and somewhere else. So I'm just like kind of getting out there more and meeting people. When I started in comics, there were no cons.
Mhm.
It was all, we were in lockdown.
Mhm.
So I never really had a chance to meet fans and like interact with people. And I'm coming to it very late now because we've been out of lockdown for a while, but I've just been working and doing stuff. But I was like, I got to get out there. I want to meet people. I want to say hi.
That's really important. And I mean, as a creator, it's even more important, but just in life, relationships
You
with people is important.
you
And
have no
people,
idea the antidote that it is to social media interactions. Like, there's some great social media interactions right now. I got to tell you, I'm living a great life because the reaction to my Alan Scott Green Lantern book has been really positive, and the reviews have been great, and people are so loving and sweet about it. But there's so much negativity and so much bad stuff out there. But you go to a comic book convention, and people are so nice.
yes, they
They're
are.
so nice, and they like what you do, and they want to talk about it, and they know about it, like we're talking about right now.
Mhm.
And you don't know what it means, like how it energizes us and gets us back into it when we've got deadlines and we've got stuff to do, when we actually know the people that we're writing these things for and creating these things for. And it changes the whole thing. It infuses us with so much energy. And so I want to do as much of that as I can, and keep that sort of positive energy in my life. Yeah.
Well,
Cons are the best.
I see you on Twitter. You've got a lot of interaction you've had with the fans, and that's so important.
I've had interaction with fans, but I've also unfortunately had interaction with people who are not exactly fans,
Certainly.
who are trolls, who are out there to, they have a political agenda.
Yeah, they'll
And
always
that's the stuff that,
trolls either side, either way will always be there, but
well, not if you block them. And that's why
well, if you block
I'll
them.
throw out some red meat, which I've
Mhm.
done recently. and then they just all come out of the woodwork, and it's like
Then you know.
block, block, block,
Uh,
block, chain block.
yeah,
It's great. It's the
yeah.
greatest thing to just remove them from your line of vision, you know. So it's and but another great way to do it is to get out among the real fans, and the real fans are at cons all over the world, and you know, I love it, absolutely love it.
There's a townie con here. It's called Albany Comic Con.
Mhm.
It's in like a Polish sportsman's club.
Hmm.
Ron Mars and Steve Orlando come to it because they live somewhere around here.
I kept trying to track down Steve Orlando in New York because we've never met. I'm a huge fan, and he had said some nice stuff to like promote Alan Scott before it was coming out. And I messaged him and I was like, I never got to see you in New York, and I have to find you at a con and say hello and meet you. I'm crazy about that guy's work. Like Midnighter for me was such a huge thing. You know, I can't wait. One of these days.
Well, personally, Albany Comic Con's not worth your time. It's like, but he's there and Ron's there. If you lived on the East Coast, I'd be like,
It's,
yeah, take a shot. But yeah,
oh, I know.
I,
Yeah,
I
I did.
wouldn't
I used to live in New York.
down in
That
Manhattan.
would have been fun. I lived in Manhattan. I lived, yeah, on Manhattan. Yeah,
Neat. Cool, man.
for a while. Yeah, I lived up in Harlem. It was great.
Well, it was great to meet you at Comic Con, and I'm such a fan, man. Like you have a fan for life now. I'm a huge supporter. Whenever I see your name, I'm always like, oh, okay, it really gets my attention. My mom watches Masters of the Universe with me, and I sit and when I saw your name, I'm like, yeah, that's the guy I showed you the picture, mom. She's like, oh, okay. So
January 25th, Masters of the Universe Revolution
looking
on
forward to it.
Netflix.
Looking forward to it.
I'm so excited about it. I was talking about it, and then like we were talking about it in New York, and then like I was like, oh well, they haven't announced the date yet, and they had literally announced it while we were talking. It got
Oh,
announced. Like it was. I was like, oh my gosh, what the timing was unreal. But yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun.
certainly. Well, you were a lot of fun, Tim, and I'm very grateful for you. Just last thing about
Yeah.
what you're writing and what you got going on, dude.
Right now, my whole life is about this book right here. Alan Scott, The Green Lantern. Issue number 1 came out last week. I don't know when this is dropping, but it came out on October 24th. And the FOC for issue 2 is this Sunday, November 5th. That's coming out in the 3rd week in November. So I hope people will pick it up. It's a 6-issue miniseries, but we're, you know, reintroducing Alan Scott, you know, through the modern lens by which we understand him, and the golden age and the JSA. You know, it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be some big stuff happening. I think by the end of it, you know, people are maybe going to think about the Green Lantern Corps a little bit differently. There's, you know, there's some big stuff we're gonna throw down in these 6 issues. So, you know, get on board, have some fun.
Is wood still his like kryptonite?
I mean, yes,
Okay.
it
Okay.
you know, and here's why. I'm not interested in retconning anything. I'm
Okay.
not interested in rewriting his life story, but none of that interests me. What has happened and what we know about him in continuity is, as far as I'm concerned, all intact, and it should be. But what we're doing is adding some more layers to it and giving you some more context. And so, yeah, you know, he doesn't understand his weaknesses yet in this story, because he also doesn't fully understand his powers yet
Mm.
in this story. There's no Green Lantern Corps. There's nobody there. Nobody gives him a ring when they're dying and tells him, and then he gets brought to Oa and is told what to do. Like, you know, he's just figuring it out. And so there are a lot of questions for him. So, you know, I don't how he learns about his weakness and vulnerability to wood is, you know, we'll see in the book.
Well, I got to tell you, I love the foil covers that I've seen. It's so awesome that they're doing those again from
Mm-hmm.
time to time on books because those were huge. You know, in the
Fun.
90s, yeah, in the 90s, it was like, oh, I get this and I buy 5 of them, I'll be a millionaire in 20 years. But
I
now
know.
it's just
Yeah.
now it's just kind of like, oh, that's so cool. I want to buy
They
one.
look nice. They look nice, and they're great for like signatures, like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
great thing to sort of, if you want to get signatures from the artists. I mean, this cover, it has a virgin foil variant and this is so beautiful, but it ends up giving you a lot of room for like David Talaski to sign it. And if you want me to deface it, I'll put my signature on there. And Kian Tormey and everybody. Get everybody, get Matt Herms, Lucas Gattoni, get the editors to sign it too.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's nice when there's, you can have that sort of collectible version of it. It's great.
Yeah, I
I
love
always I always say everybody should be able to see themselves in comics. And then I see the foil variants come out and you can literally see your reflection in the comics. I'm like, oh, well, that's not what I
yeah,
meant, but
yeah.
it works. You can see you're getting a guest appearance by Viola, one of my cats. So this
Yeah,
is
my
what happens.
dog is at my feet and he was like going woof woof like that. And I'm like, be quiet. So
At a certain point, she's just like, okay, you're done now. I need
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. She's like the alarm clock, the time limit. So
What's funny is she's just like this Cthulhu monster now. She's just a tail. Like she's just
yeah,
this
yeah,
wild,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Tim,
Well,
thank
thank you so much. It was an honor to talk to you, and I
oh
get to
thanks,
talk
Tim.
long Halloween, and I'm so glad that you spotted me at New York Comic Con, and we got to meet and chat, and I
We took a
hopefully,
picture. That was a good picture too. I
yeah.
enjoyed it. Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I looked amazing.
You really did. Your hair was on point. Your hair was on point.
Yeah, yeah. Not today. That's why I'm wearing a hat.
Yeah, I noticed that. I ran my hand through my hair. I'm like, yeah, I gotta keep up with the Sheridans here. So
Thank you, and we'll do it again.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Tim, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. You are a
You too.
pleasure to
Take care.
talk
Bye.
to. Thank you.